particularly sensitive to the story about the high school students who got into the in New York City. It really is a bit of a nightmare for kids getting into high school. And I speak from direct experience, one which ended yesterday, right after the show. But there are a half a dozen elite schools in the city that are citywide you can get into. Many schools are citywide, but these are specifically you need to test into. And the testing is pretty rigorous. And many kids get tutored or to test, specifically, for these tests. Of course, that costs money. I am aware of this. My child was one of those children who did so. She did not get into those schools, but in New York City, there was something like 1,000 kids who were admitted into some of these top schools, and only 7 were African American. And there's been an attempt and we're talking. There's actually like another level of elite schools beyond that other level, and it's highly problematic. And they're still trying to figure out what exactly to do about it because you need some measure, I guess. But let's play this AOC clip. I want to do this. I will say, though, that, here is AOC at a meeting expressing the issue here. Now, many high school students, it's rare to have a high school student who goes to a school that is, just a 5-minute walk away from them in New York City. More often than not, the commute's anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 minutes can be an hour and a half, hour, 20 minutes, depending on where they wanted to go. And my daughter applied to 12 schools plus the taking the specialized test and some that you have to audition for. So there's a wide range of schools, but there's also a wide divergence in the quality of schools. Far wider divergence than there should be. And this, of course, is dictated in many respects by geography, by the wealth of the people who live in any given neighborhood in New York City. And people who have lived in New York City for any period of time can see this development or who are sensitive to it because they have kids or they know people with kids. As neighborhoods gentrify, the schools end up lagging in terms of achievement 10, 12, 15 years or so. And in part, it's simply because more people move into the neighborhood who have money. Because of that money, they have the ability to either give money to the school, literally give it to the school. And the divergence I've seen between parent-teacher advisory board, parent-teacher associations budgets range anywhere from $25,000 annually, some $15,000 annually, to $1 million a year. That's a big difference. You have the ability to almost like add 25% or 20% to your school's budget annually. That makes a big difference in the quality of education the kids are going to get because suddenly they're going to have second teachers in the classrooms, assistant teachers. They're going to have after-school programs that are enrichment. They're going to have programs during the school, art, other programs. Not to mention all the research we know about kids showing up at school with far better remedial skills from wealthier families. Just because they get more direct time with adults, they get more experiences as a child to develop their vocabulary and their, brains are rather elastic at that age. So all of this is a function of some of the issues of the schooling here. AOC met with a group of parents, and it's interesting. The cross currents of fights in New York City about schools is the currents go in about 15 different directions. But at one point, she, towards the end of this talk, sort of provides a much starker sense of where the line should be drawn in these sort of debates.
Because it's important that we have this discussion. My father was an exception to this rule, an exception to these statistics. So my dad was born in the South Bronx while the Bronx was burning. He was raised 5 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. And he did what he had to do, and my dad got into Brooklyn Tech. So my dad grew up, and growing up, my dad always told me about this experience going to Brooklyn Tech. He told me about what his life was like, where as a teenager, he got up and left his apartment at 5 o'clock in the morning every day to get onto the 6 train or to get onto the 4 train and ride a very dangerous subway during the 70s at 15 years old to go to Brooklyn Tech because it was seen as his only opportunity to have a dignified life. And he loved his experience at Brooklyn Tech because he went to a good school. My question is, why are there only 5 or a handful of schools in New York City that are seen to get us the top? And my question is, why isn't every public school in New York City a Brooklyn Tech caliber school? Everyone should be. And so my appeal to what I'm hearing, and I respect the concern, because we need to put our children first. And so I understand the concern. But my concern I'd be happy to engage with these folks. My concern is that this right here, when we're fighting each other, is exactly what happens under a scarcity mindset. Because this should not be the fight. This should be the fight. This should not be the fight. We are in this.
So she's, and some of this is visual, but she's making the argument that the problem here is you have such intense fighting over these resources because the resources are limited, because you don't have great schools all across the city or open to every student. Now, the reality is when it comes to education, the inputs are far outweigh anything else that can happen in the school in terms of what the outcomes are. So in other words, schools cannot fix societal ills. They reflect them. And despite that, New York has figured out how to at least make some schools top-performing schools. Not like Brooklyn Tech, has been in a traditionally, a wealthy neighborhood. Now everywhere in Brooklyn is getting getting moneyed in some way. But Fort Greene was not exactly a posh neighborhood. Certainly not in the 70s. But the idea of being able to put resources in there and get the top performing students around the city and put them all in one place, there is, at the very least, some type of roadmap to improve the quality of schools. And a lot of that has to do with financing. And so there is a huge opportunity there that a roadmap in the future. We weren't going to start with this. I'm sensitive to it because obviously my daughter just found out what school she's going to yesterday. And she's deciding between 2 schools. So we'll see.
Mazel tov.
Yes. LaGuardia or Murrow. She's got in for the vocal programs in both. Yes, I think longtime listeners are aware of her pipes, as it were. But and I will take from any type of admissions folk, if you're involved in any way in education in New York City or colleges that are aware of these schools, I will take your advice. Send me an email. Tell me, because we have no idea. She may have to commute like an hour to go to LaGuardia. A little bit less for Morrow.